There's a room everyone pictures the same way. Somewhere near the top, a man in an expensive suit, checking a watch that costs more than most people's cars, talking a little louder than everyone else because he wants to be heard. That's the millionaire we imagine. Now picture the actual richest person in that room. Chances are you'd walk right past them. No flashy watch, no loud voice. Maybe they're the one quietly listening in the corner, wearing something you wouldn't look at twice. This isn't a coincidence, it's a pattern. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. We grow up believing wealth is built from the outside in. Get a better job, find a better opportunity. Get lucky with the right investment at the right time. Money first, mindset second. That's the order we assume. It feels logical. It's also almost completely backwards. Because the people who actually build lasting wealth aren't running a better financial plan than everyone else. They're running a different operating system entirely. A set of thinking patterns so quiet, so unglamorous, that nobody bothers to notice them. The money isn't the cause, it's the result. That's the real story we're not told. Not the story of what wealthy people buy, but the story of what wealthy people think. The habits they've quietly installed in their minds that make wealth almost inevitable, long before the bank account catches up. Here's what makes this uncomfortable. If wealth is really about psychology and not circumstance, that means most of what stopped you so far wasn't a lack of money. It was a way of thinking you've never had a reason to question. So this isn't going to be another video about budgeting tricks or investment tips you've heard 100 times before. We're going somewhere most people never bother looking, into the actual psychological patterns behind the people who build wealth that lasts and stays. By the time this is over, you won't just understand how they think. You'll start noticing exactly where your own thinking has been working against you this entire time. Quietly, invisibly, for years. And it starts with a question most people never ask. If looking rich isn't the same as being rich, what does actual wealth look like instead? The answer might be sitting right next to you, and you'd never know it. Think of two co-workers. One drives a leased BMW, wears a nice watch, always has the newest phone. The other drives a 10-year-old Honda, wears the same jacket every winter, and you'd probably forget what phone they even use. If someone asked you to guess which one has more money in the bank, you'd pick the BMW guy without thinking twice. Most people would. And most people would be wrong. This is the part nobody tells you growing up. The car, the watch, the constant upgrades, none of it is proof of wealth. Half the time it's proof of the opposite. It's proof that someone is financing an image, not building a future. There's actual research behind this, and it's not subtle. Study after study on consumption and net worth finds the same pattern. The people spending the most on visible luxury often carry the least in actual savings and investments. Meanwhile, a huge share of real millionaires live in modest houses, drive normal cars, and would blend into any crowd without a second look. They're not hiding their money. They're just not spending it on things that announce it. Here's why this keeps happening. Status spending and wealth building aren't cousins. They're not even running in the same direction. One is about being seen. It wants an audience. It wants a reaction. It needs someone else to notice. The other is about being secure. It doesn't care who's watching, because it isn't being done for anyone else. Two completely different needs, wearing the same paycheck. So the leased car isn't really about the car. It's a signal, aimed outward, paid for with money that could have gone somewhere quieter. And the accountant in the 10-year-old Honda isn't cheap. He's just not paying for an audience he doesn't need. This is worth sitting with for a second, because it probably touches something in your own life. Somewhere in your spending, there's a purchase that wasn't really about the thing itself. It was about how it would look, who would notice, what it would say about you. That's not a confession. It's just how most of us were trained to spend. But it's worth asking, honestly, which of your recent purchases were decisions, and which ones were performances? Because if the outside doesn't tell you who's actually building wealth, then the real difference has to be happening somewhere you can't see it. Somewhere inside how these two people actually think. In the 1870s, a young oil refiner named John D. Rockefeller had a habit that made his own partners uncomfortable. Every time the business turned a profit, they wanted to expand, celebrate, spend. He wanted to put nearly all of it back into the company. Better equipment, more efficient plants, buying out weaker competitors during the exact moments they were struggling. Not glamorous decisions, not even particularly interesting ones. Just the same choice, made over and over, for decades. That's the part that gets left out of most success stories. We like to imagine discipline as some kind of personality trait. You either have it, like a gift, or you don't. But that's not really what was happening here. It wasn't a switch he was born with. It was a decision, repeated so many times, it eventually stopped feeling like a decision at all. This actually shows up in psychological research, not just business history. Time preference studies, the ones that measure how people choose between smaller rewards now and larger rewards later, find something interesting. That preference isn't fixed. It shifts based on practice, environment, and repetition. People who consistently choose the long-term option aren't relying on willpower every single time. They've simply built the pattern so many times that the short-term option stops feeling tempting in the first place. Here's why this matters for you, specifically. If delayed gratification is a trained response and not a personality trait, then the fact that you've struggled with it before doesn't mean anything about who you are. It means you haven't built the pattern yet, and patterns can be built. Think about the small trades you make constantly, almost without noticing. Spending an extra hour scrolling instead of learning a skill that could double your income later. Buying the upgrade now instead of letting an investment sit and grow. None of these decisions feel significant in the moment. That's exactly why they're dangerous. Small trades don't announce themselves. They just quietly accumulate in one direction or the other for years. So here's something worth doing before you watch anything else today. Find one repeating decision in your life. Something small, something you do weekly, maybe even daily, where you're choosing the smaller reward now. Then deliberately trade it just once this week for the larger reward later. Not forever, just once. That single repetition is how the pattern actually starts. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Rockefeller had this discipline in spades. So did plenty of others who built real fortunes through patience and reinvestment. And yet some of the most disciplined people in history still made decisions that cost them everything. Which raises a question that delayed gratification alone can't answer. If patience isn't the whole story, what else is quietly working against people who seem to be doing everything right? A founder builds a company from nothing, sells it for a life-changing number, and within 3 years is broke again. Not because the business failed a second time, because the moment the money landed, he started living like the exit was permanent instead of a single event. The private jet memberships, the house that needed a full staff to run, the watch collection that had nothing to do with telling time. None of it was stupidity. It was something quieter than that. Here's the uncomfortable part. We like to explain financial collapse with simple math. Spent more than he earned, didn't plan for taxes, trusted the wrong advisor, and sure, all of that happened somewhere along the way. But underneath the math was a different problem entirely. He wasn't just spending money. He was spending money to become someone. The mansion wasn't shelter. It was proof. The jet wasn't travel. It was a costume for a role he'd just been cast in, and he wasn't about to give it up. This isn't only a founder with millions problem. It shows up the second anyone gets a raise. Somebody moves from a modest salary to a bigger one, and within months, the car upgrades, the apartment upgrades. The whole lifestyle stretches to match the number on the paycheck. Barely any of that new income ever reaches savings. It's not that the person suddenly forgot how to budget. It's that the raise came with an unspoken invitation. to become the version of themselves that earns that much. And almost everyone accepts it without noticing they've said yes. This is the part worth sitting with. Overspending usually isn't a discipline problem or a knowledge gap. It's an identity problem wearing a financial disguise. Which means fixing a budget rarely fixes the behavior for long, because the budget was never the actual battlefield. So here's something to try. Pick one category where your spending has quietly grown. Dining, clothes, gadgets, whatever comes to mind first. Ask yourself honestly, is this money going towards something you value or toward an identity you've been performing without realizing it? And if identity is really steering the wheel this whole time, that raises something bigger. Nobody arrives at adulthood building that identity from scratch. Something shaped it long before the first paycheck ever showed up. A kid grows up watching a parent freeze every time a bill arrives. Nothing dramatic happens. No one says a word about it out loud. But the tension in the room is unmistakable, and the kid absorbs it the way kids absorb everything, without understanding it, without questioning it, just filing it away as how money feels. 20 years later, that same person has a stable job, a decent income, savings in the bank. And yet the second an unexpected expense shows up, something tightens in their chest that has nothing to do with their actual bank balance. The math says they're fine. The body disagrees. We like to think our relationship with money is something we chose as adults, a set of habits and values we picked up through experience and decision-making. But most of it was never a decision at all. It was installed. Long before you earned your first dollar, before you understood interest rates or budgets or investing, your nervous system was already learning whether money meant safety or danger, whether there was always enough or never quite enough. This is why two people can earn the exact same salary and experience money in completely opposite ways. One spends freely without a second thought, unbothered by the numbers. The other checks their balance daily, anxious even when there's plenty saved. The difference usually isn't intelligence, and it isn't even current circumstances. It's conditioning laid down before either of them could talk in full sentences. You can actually watch this pattern travel through families, generation after generation. A grandparent who lived through real scarcity raises a parent obsessed with saving every spare cent. That parent raises a child who either mirrors the same anxious caution or swings hard in the opposite direction, spending as a kind of rebellion against a childhood that always felt tight. Neither response was chosen consciously. Both were absorbed. So here's something worth sitting with for a moment. Think of one belief about money you inherited without ever agreeing to it. Something like there's never enough, or money isn't safe to enjoy, or saving matters more than living. Ask yourself, honestly, whether that belief is still true for the life you actually have now, or whether it's simply an old alarm that never got switched off. And if these instincts really were installed that early, quietly running in the background this whole time, then something else deserves an answer. In the moments that actually matter, a big investment, a risk worth taking, a decision that could change everything, how do the people who build real wealth manage to override an alarm that's been ringing since childhood? In 16th century Florence, there was a rule most successful families followed without ever writing it down. Never announce a plan before it's finished. Never let a rival know your next move until it's already happening. The families who leaked their ambitions early, who talked about the marriage alliance before it was signed, or the land purchase before it closed, often watched someone else maneuver in first and take it from them. Silence wasn't secrecy for its own sake. It was survival. We're taught the opposite instinct today. Post the goal. Announce the plan. Tell everyone what you're building, because apparently accountability and support come from an audience. And sometimes that's true, but there's a quieter cost to this that almost nobody talks about, because it doesn't show up right away. It shows up months later, when the momentum has mysteriously drained out of something you were once excited about. Here's what actually happens when you share a plan too early. The people around you get to experience the reward of your ambition, the excitement, the congratulations, the identity of someone who's doing something big, without you actually having done anything yet. Psychologically, that premature praise can quietly satisfy the exact drive that was supposed to push you toward finishing. And that's the gentle version. The less gentle version is envy, subtle resistance, or someone deciding your unfinished plan is worth interfering with before it becomes real. This is exactly why so many founders now stay quiet before a launch, right up until the moment the product is ready to speak for itself. Not because secrecy is glamorous, because an idea in progress is fragile, and attention aimed at something unfinished can pull it apart before it's had the chance to become solid. The founders who talk least beforehand are often the ones building the most. They're simply not spending energy managing everyone else's opinions about something that isn't finished yet. This is worth applying immediately, not someday. Take one goal you're currently working on. Something you'd normally post about, mention at dinner, bring up with friends. Try holding it back this time. Not forever. Just until it's far enough along that it can stand on its own without needing anyone's reaction to feel real. But silence by itself isn't a strategy. It's just the absence of one. If the people who build real power aren't spending their attention broadcasting their plans, the real question is what they're actually doing with all that attention instead. They spent it studying, watching, positioning themselves for moves nobody else could see coming yet. That's the part that never makes it into the highlight reel. The years of quiet preparation before the overnight success that outsiders only notice at the very end. There's a version of investing that almost nobody finds exciting, and that's exactly why it works. Buying a small, unglamorous stake in something and simply leaving it alone for 15, 20, 30 years. No trading, no timing the market, no trying to look clever. Just holding a position long after everyone else has grown bored of it or panicked out of it. When you look at the people who actually built enormous long-term wealth through markets or real estate, the pattern isn't cleverness in the moment. It's patience across decades that almost nobody else was willing to sustain. We're wired to believe that big outcomes require big dramatic actions, the bold pitch, the risky bet, the headline-worthy move. But zoom out on almost any massive long-term result, and you'll usually find something quieter underneath it. A decision made years earlier, so small at the time that barely anyone noticed it happening. The visible move gets the credit. The invisible positioning is what actually built it. Here's the part that should feel encouraging rather than intimidating. You don't need access to some secret opportunity to start playing this way. You need a willingness to make a boring decision now that won't pay off for years, and to make it anyway, precisely because almost nobody else will. So take a moment and think of one long-term position you could start today that most people would consider unglamorous, even a little dull. It might be a modest, consistent investment. It might be building a skill that has no immediate payoff. It might be a relationship or reputation you're quietly investing in, without asking for anything back yet. Start it small. Let time do the part you can't rush. This is where something interesting happens. Once you've built the patience, the identity shift, the emotional composure, and the strategic restraint we've walked through so far, you're left holding all the internal tools that separate those who build lasting wealth from those who merely chase it. But tools alone don't guarantee anything permanent. What's left is the harder question. What actually needs to change inside you, for good, so none of this fades the moment life gets comfortable again? A woman spends 4 years searching for the perfect business idea. She reads every book, joins every group, waits for the market to line up just right. Nothing ever quite fits. Then, almost by accident, she watches a neighbor turn a modest side skill into a steady income, not because the neighbor found a brilliant opportunity, but because the neighbor had become someone who finished what she started, who reinvested instead of spent, who stayed quiet and patient long enough for something small to grow. The strategy was almost boring. The person behind it wasn't the same person who started. This is the part that's easy to miss after everything we've covered. It's tempting to walk away from all of this thinking you need one more framework, one more system, one more strategy to finally make it work. But strategies were never really the missing piece. They're just the visible surface of something running much deeper. Everything we've walked through, the patience, the quiet identity shift, the discretion, the long, unglamorous positioning, isn't a list of separate tricks. It's one architecture. A way of thinking that, once it's actually in place, makes the right decisions feel almost automatic instead of exhausting. The strategies stop being something you have to force. They start being something that simply falls out of who you've become. So here's the real shift, and it's smaller than it sounds. Stop asking what you need to do to get rich. Start asking who you need to become, so that the decisions leading to wealth stop feeling like decisions at all. Pick one thing from everything we've discussed. Maybe it's staying quiet about a goal until it's real. Maybe it's questioning one purchase that was never really about the object itself. Maybe it's simply holding a long position without needing to prove anything to anyone. Choose one. Commit to practicing it for the next 30 days. Not as a task on a list, but as a small rehearsal for the person you're quietly becoming. Because here's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath everything we've discussed. Most people will hear all of this, nod along, feel briefly inspired, and change absolutely nothing. Not because they don't understand it. Because understanding was never the missing piece either. Which leaves one question we haven't answered yet. What actually happens to the people who hear all of this and still choose to stay exactly the same? Nothing happens to them. That's the honest answer, and it's the uncomfortable one. No dramatic collapse, no clear lesson learned. Just the same patterns running quietly in the background for another year, and then another, until a decade has passed, and they're still waiting for the right information, the right opportunity, the right moment to finally start thinking differently. That's really what this whole video has been circling. Wealth was never sitting behind some piece of information you hadn't found yet. It was never one strategy away, one opportunity away, one lucky break away. It's the quiet result of a mind that's been rebuilt, decision by decision, in ways nobody else was watching and nobody else was applauding. That's also exactly why so few people ever get there. Not because it's complicated, because it's invisible. There's no moment where a crowd cheers for someone choosing silence over sharing, or patience over a quick reward, or a smaller purchase over a status symbol. Nobody claps for the version of you making the quiet decision, which is precisely why so many people quietly stop making it. So don't try to change everything you just heard. That's how most transformation dies before it starts. Pick one belief from everything we've covered, just one, and spend this week actually taking it apart. Not agreeing with it in your head, actually testing it against a real decision you make in the next 7 days. Because here's the thought worth carrying with you longer than anything else in this video. The millionaires you've been quietly envying were never hiding a formula. They were never holding some secret sequence of steps the rest of us never got access to. They were just hiding a quieter mind,